Thank you for taking the time to be with us today in our continuing webinar series. Last week, we talked about some go-to-market data priorities for a diligence data room. Today, we are basically assuming that an investment or acquisition has been completed, and now it's time to go into value creation mode. And we'll try to make this relevant to CFOs, go-to-market leaders, and just as importantly, PE value creation teams. And by the way, pardon my voice if it sounds a little rough. I've been dealing with some allergies, so I apologize in advance. We're going to start. Let's go to the agenda slide, Dan. We're going to start by briefly talking about our philosophy on how to prioritize all the different things you could do from a value creation perspective. Then we're going to spend most of the session showing how to use finance and go-to-market data to zero in on ICP. We'll touch on the type of data that you need to make all this happen. And finally, we'll offer our thoughts on why finance needs to be, or really is the most best positioned steward of go-to-market data. So what to prioritize? So you just got acquired, or you just landed a nice financing, or maybe you're new in seat, right? You were just hired by the board to prepare the business for the next level. And now you have maybe 2 years before the next financing to reach the next level of scale and efficient growth if you're VC backed, or maybe 3 to 5 years if you're owned by PE. As the CFO or PE operating partner, how do you prioritize amongst all the possible value creation opportunities you can address? Typically, most people think the first thing to look at is the leadership team, and with frequent scrutiny around the go-to-market leadership team. Our view is the first priority should be ensuring that there's an adequate decision support system. In other words, that the data and analytics posture of the company is sufficient, because otherwise, any new members of the leadership team are not really going to be equipped to do their job properly. It's part of the reason we see such a rotating door in go-to-market leaders. They're brought in, but the state of the data is pathetic, so they don't really have the tools to inform them to make the right decisions, and we just keep going through this nasty cycle. Your go-to-market data and reporting has likely always been suspect, largely contained within each of the sales, marketing, and CS silos. And despite the fact that you likely have a bunch of reports and dashboards, they never seem to answer the key questions that the board always asks. So we go through these exercises of pulling together reports to answer questions from the CEO and board. And these exercises are often mind-numbing projects that spread across multiple weeks. And that may have been okay to get you to this point. But as a CFO, you're kind of well aware that it's going to be difficult to change trajectory without being more precise and more efficient. And the current state of your go-to-market data stands in the way of that. So where do you start? Well, always start by reminding yourself what the primary drivers of valuation are. And the name of the game these days clearly is efficient growth. Rule of 40, more recently, rule of X. These are rules of thumb to help kind of normalize the evaluation of efficient growth across businesses. Scale also matters, but scale without line of sight to profitability and without the ability to efficiently deploy capital, it really doesn't work anymore, other than if you're part of the AI arms race. But for the rest of us, it's efficient growth. And there really doesn't have to be a trade-off between growth and profitability. If you can't efficiently deploy capital to accelerate growth, then you really would be better off investing at a level that maximizes efficient growth. And while growth may be valued generally more than profitability, that's only if there is profitability. So let's look at the obstacles to efficiency. And while there are many areas of inefficiency within most organizations' go-to-market functions, assuming there's some level of product market fit, then there are two primary systemic causes of inefficiency. Number one, lack of alignment across the sales, marketing, and CS functions. And secondly, lack of precision around defining the ICP. If we go to the next slide and turn back to where do you start with transforming your go-to-market data posture to be a legitimate tool to enable growth and create value? In other words, what's priority one? Hands down, priority one is having the go-to-market data that you can merge with the cost and financial data to get precision around your ICP. ICP is the elephant in the room when it comes to efficiency. Everything else is just kind of tuning the margins, whether it's optimizing processes, channels, campaigns, or people. It's impossible to get any of those operational axes to a fully optimized state if you haven't nailed your ICP. A suboptimal ICP is basically a tax on every other part of the go-to-market engine. And we're going to use this session today to walk you through an approach you can use to determine ICP. In follow-on webinars, we'll walk through approaches to use data to optimize for process, channel, campaign, and people. But today, it's all about ICP. And first, there's some theory behind the approach we use. Next slide. So the driving theory is that you should define ICP in a way that drives the most scalable customer unit economics. Yeah, what does that mean, right? That simply means focus on customer types or profiles that are the most profitable over their life. The most popular metric of customer unit economics, particularly in the SaaS or subscription world, is LTV to CAC, lifetime value divided by customer acquisition costs. LTV is lifetime value of all gross profits produced by a given customer over the life of that customer. This is what CS teams care about, right? It summarizes the effects of renewals, churns, upsells, downsells, cross-sells, expansions, you name it. And it accounts for the costs of CS, the costs of their systems, et cetera. Strong lifetime value is what we want to get from our customers. CAC, on the other hand, is the cost to land those customers in the first place. It is typically sales, marketing, SDR, other BD type costs. There are a few things that aren't great about LTV to CAC that I don't particularly like. Most specifically, it doesn't account for cost of capital. That's a topic for another day. I'll go on a little tangent. We have a resource on our website. I can't remember what it's exactly called, but it's proposing that you think about using customer net present value instead of LTV to CAC as a unit economic metric. We think it's just grounded in more detail. It might be an interesting read for people that like that kind of stuff. Anyway, LTV to CAC also gets a little funky if you have net dollar retention above 1, in essence, negative churn. So many people end up using logo churn instead of net dollar churn, and that tends to mix apples and oranges. But nevertheless, for our purposes and for most purposes, we can accept that LTV to CAC is a useful rule of thumb metric. So go-to-market teams, in order to get ICP right, need to have a clear sense of LTV to CAC for each of its different customer profiles. Then you rank those profiles from highest to lowest, right? And the only reason you wouldn't choose the segment with the highest LTV CAC as your ICP is if there just aren't enough companies like that out there to build an attractive business around, or maybe there's some intransigent obstacle to acquiring these customers or accessing these prospects. And this is what I mean when I say scalable customer unit economics. The unit economics needs to be such that it's worthwhile to have them as customers, but the population of prospects that fit the target profile needs to be large enough and accessible enough that you could build an attractive business with successful execution. LTV to CAC is a full funnel or full journey go-to-market metric. Focus on LTV to CAC as a go-to-market leadership team, and that alone will force better alignment that will naturally drive more efficiency. So at this point, I'm actually going to switch and share a spreadsheet, which is a tool that we use. Share. Dan, is that spreadsheet showing?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. So now let me walk you through this. There are 8 tabs in it, and this will be the bulk of the rest of this thing, but it's a very useful template for a tool to determine ICP. So let's start with the easy part, which is lifetime value. And mathematically, lifetime value, LTV, is average sale price times gross margin percentage. In other words, average profit per customer divided by the churn per customer. So what do we start with? The first thing we want to do is figure out the average sale price, or average MRR in this case. It starts with a tab that we use in a lot of our tools here, particularly retention-focused tools, which is just simply capturing the historical recognized revenue per customer by month. So this, basically, you can see on the left, in this template, we've got 79 different customers, and we're showing since early 2019 what the recognized recurring revenue is for each of these customers every month. And I think this particular template goes through the end of 2024. You'll notice we've also added a couple columns, qualifying columns, the start month and start quarter. We use that in a different tool for retention purposes. But the 3 columns with ICP attributes, we use that in order to tag each of these customers so we can later filter to zero this stuff down on a per segment or per ICP basis. So once you've got all this historical recognized revenue, it's very simple. We just go down here to the bottom, divide, the sum. If you look at the, the formula up there, we're actually summing all of the customers that showed up in that column with revenue that had big as their ICP attribute 1. And then we're dividing by the count of those customers that had that attribute. So this particular tab gives you the average MRR broken down by ICP attribute. And if we just look over the last 12 months in 2024, you can see that there's 3 that sort of stand out as a little bit better than the others. In the ICP attribute 1, big shows up, and this is all made up data. So don't, if something doesn't make sense, don't say, that doesn't make sense. It's all just made up data, but you'll get the point. Green in the second attribute, and APAC in the third attribute. Okay, so we've got step 1, average sale price, in our case, average recognized MRR. Now we want to translate that to profitability. So we have to multiply that by the gross margin percent. In this case, I'm keeping it very simple for the webinar, which is we're assuming the same gross margin across all profiles of customers. We know that not to be true, but we're assuming that for this webinar. And we're saying it's 85%. So to get the average gross profit dollars, we simply multiply the 85% times the average MRR from the previous tab. Couple of notes about what to include in COGS or not in gross profit. In COGS, we think you should include all of CS, account management, and support, as well as any associated infrastructure like Turn Zero or Gainsight, tools like that, et cetera, along with the hosting costs for production software if you're a software company. If you're a professional services company or you have professional services arms, we think you should include the billable hours and maybe some factor of that. but do not include all of the unabsorbed capacity that you have, because you didn't need that to service those customers. So we would have that fall into OpEx instead. And then the last thing is, we have found it's useful to periodically, and this is one of the ways we distinguish between different gross margins on different profiles, is to do activity audits. So for example, you ought to, at least once a year, look at all your support tickets and bucket them by these various ICP profile attributes to start to understand, is one customer type more heavy users of our support resources than others. Very often we see SMB customers tend to be high maintenance, right? Because they don't have the internal skill sets often to do a lot of the stuff themselves, so they lean heavily on the vendor. So they tend to have very different cost structure than maybe a enterprise account would be. So we encourage you to go through that effort to get specific on how your COGS can be attributed against these various ICP attributes. But for this exercise, we're assuming they're all 85%. So next, so we now have the numerator of the equation of LTV, which is ASP times gross margin, which is average gross profit. Now, the denominator is churn. Here again, some of you who might have been on last week would have seen a similar tab to this in our retention model. But what we do here, again, we're simply duplicating the data from the first tab, but here we're filtering it. So we're only looking at all of the big all of the people that have big as the ICP1 attribute, all right, and so on down. And this particular tool, the way it's set up, will automatically calculate the retention. So we're looking for big, this whole top section, and you can see down at the bottom here, we're calculating year-over-year gross dollar retention, year-over-year net dollar retention, and so on. I'll collapse all that stuff to basically show you when you do that for each of these 9 different attributes that we're looking at, we end up with the gross dollar retention and the net dollar retention in a pretty concise table. And we can, again, pretty quickly see that there are some attributes that stand out for retention. And that, again, would be small, green, and APAC. So we're already through this exercise starting to get a little bit of a feel that maybe some of these profile attributes are indicative of better customers than another. So the last step on LTV then is simply to calculate it, which is the numerator comes from tab 2, tab LTV step 2, which is the average GP. That's right here. The denominator is the churn, which is, in our case, we're using 1 minus the gross dollar retention from what was on LTV step 3 tab. So divide. The other thing we're doing here is we got to normalize for time period. That churn is an annual number. That average profit is a monthly number. So we'll multiply the average profit by 12, divide that by the churn. That ends up with a lifetime value. And you can see that the lifetime value is very different across these various ICP attribute profiles. Last thing, what we did put in here, just so you can see the effects of gross margin, we'll use just the size, big, medium, and small. And I'm going to change the gross margin, and you can see, let me make a copy of this first. Copy value, paste values. Okay, now I'm going to change the gross margin and say 90% for big, 85% for medium, and 60 because the small guys require so much hand holding. And you can see how the gross margin affects the lifetime value. Here's what it was when they were all considered to be 85% gross margin, but now yes, small is still better lifetime value, but it has dramatically collapsed them. And so it is important that you go through the effort to try to have profile specific COGS and gross margins. So that's the top half of LTV to CAC. Now let's turn to CAC. We start with something you've probably seen from us before, a full funnel model. So much of this stuff is dependent on having full funnel conversion models. And this stuff comes from historical data, hopefully, that you have instrumented your environment properly, et cetera, so that you can actually produce full funnel analytics. We have a full funnel model here for each of the 9 attributes we're looking at. Starts with leads. Leads convert into initial meetings that are set up. Some portion of those actually take place. After that, sales team decides are they qualified to be a pipeline opportunity, and then they go through various stages of pipeline to where they become a deal. So you see conversion rates on the left, cycle time, how long does it take to move from each step to step on the right, average MRR, which we had from the very first tab, and then we just reverse engineer the conversion rates to figure out ratios. How many leads lead to deals do you need? How many meetings do you need to get a deal, et cetera? Incidentally, I've just shown people before, but the work to create these full funnel models, it is substantial, and it's one of the places Scale Matters helps. We have a full funnel analytics piece of software that does all of this automatically after we've worked with our customers to properly instrument their environments. So you can see, as an example, right, here's funnels by segment: emerging enterprise, mid-market, SMB. It's a different example than in the spreadsheet, but it also calculates the ratios. How many leads do we need from each segment and each type of lead to get a deal? How many opportunities, et cetera. So the first important part is to do this work, but there are tools out there to help automate a lot of this effort. So we start with the funnel conversion model. The second thing we need to have a sales rep cost attribution model, right? We need to figure out how do we attribute the cost of sales reps against various stages of the funnel in order to have CAC. And in this case, what you see here on this tab, we've just copied the funnel conversion model from the previous tab down here. Then this little tool effectively tells you for each profile, right? Big, medium, let's say medium, let's stick with big. How many hours of sales rep time is required to generate a deal? And that comes from the conversion rates. The conversion rates dictate how many records at each stage of the funnel you need to ultimately generate a deal. The stuff in red is data that has to come from sales leadership. So we expect our sales leaders to once a year, maybe twice a year at most, sort of do an observational survey to understand the activities and the time spent by their reps at each stage of the sales process. And that's what this data in red is. They're basically saying at every stage, there's a certain amount of time that's spent just emailing and calls, coordinating next steps. 0.17 hours, actually 10 minutes, so it's 0.1667 hours, half an hour in this case. Then the actual key meeting at this stage is to have that initial discovery meeting. So the time the rep spends to prepare for and actually conduct that meeting is an hour, right? So you end up with rep hours per record at each part of the process. Multiply that by how many records they need in that stage to get a deal. It gives you total hours, which gets summed up over here. So you can see for big, it's 63 hours of rep time, 10% commission, $7,000 commission. For small, it only takes 43 hours of rep time. So those deals don't require as much work to get done. So that's what this second CAC tab, step 2, rep cost per deal is. And the final CAC tab then is simply to calculate customer acquisition costs. Again, we've repeated the full funnel model up top because it comes into play. There's some additional data to be input here, which is top of funnel data, cost data. We expect the marketing teams and or finance to have determined a methodology for attributing top of funnel spend against various ICP attributes, and something we help them with all the time. But anyway, it translates into different costs per lead for these different attributes. We also understand from the sales leader how much time a rep has to work those leads just to get a meeting set up, and how different that is across the different ICP attributes. That data then translates into initially top of funnel costs. So what's the cost? Lead cost to get a meeting is the $120. Divide that by the 2% conversion rate to get a meeting set up. So it's $6,000 to set a meeting, $2,400 of rep hours per meeting set. Total cost per meeting set's $8,400. If you then adjust for the hold rate, the 75% set the hold rate, that says it basically costs us $11,255 to have a completed meeting in the big profile. And the same thing happens across all of the different ICP attributes. And then bottom of funnel is simply saying, okay, for big, we saw it was 63 hours. We saw the commissions was 78 from the previous tab. So the bottom of funnel cost is 4111. Total cost per deal, 22,000 in big, 11,000 medium, 10,000 small, and so on. So that those 3 tabs provide you with the mechanism to create ICP profile specific CAC. And then the last thing we do is just summarize it, which is divide the LTV number from tab 4 by the CAC number in tab 3. We've done that here, and lo and behold, even though it's fake data, it's interesting because small and green stand out. One of the reasons you'll know this is fake data is nobody has this type of LTV to CAC ratio. More typically, it'd be 1/10 of this. But you understand the concept that if you go through this series of steps, you will be able to identify most profitable ICP attribute profiles. So let me hand it back to Dan. Figure out how I can stop sharing. Okay.
We're good.
Okay, perfect. So how to get the underlying data? As is likely obvious, arriving at these calculations is dependent on combining what would traditionally be considered go-to-market data along with what would be considered finance data. On the go-to-market side, the foundational data set that's required is full funnel conversion models from lead to deal that need to be sliceable and diceable by various segmentation profiles. This is an area where we see most businesses struggle because they've never really architected their instrumentation or processes to create this data and ensure adequate hygiene of data. We're short on time, but I will tell you, this is where Scale Matters does its finest work in helping our customers, is to get this full funnel stuff. The second go-to-market data component is the attribution of sales rep hours against the various stages of the funnel. Again, it's an exercise that needs to be done once or twice a year. Or if you're putting in place a fundamentally new go-to-market motion, this is typically gathered through observation or discussion from sales leaders and their reps. The third key data component is retention data. You can argue whether that's go-to-market data or finance data. Metrics like logo retention, net dollar retention, et cetera, are often considered go-to-market metrics, but they are all derived from monthly recognized recurring revenue, which almost always sits in the accounting system or the billing system. And the final piece of data to make this happen is top of funnel cost data. In other words, the costs incurred to generate a lead. And again, whether you view this as go-to-market data or finance data, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that companies be intentional about designing an ability to attribute top of funnel costs across their various segmentation profiles. This is particularly a particular area where we think CFOs and FP&A teams can assert themselves to help the go-to-market leaders think through this. Lastly, traditional and we say, why do CFOs need to own this? And we really do think they do need to own this. And it's because traditional incentive structures for go-to-market leaders, they aren't really set up to maximize company value, right? Marketing leaders are incentivized on marketing generated pipeline, sales leaders on new logo bookings, CS leaders on renewals and net retention. And so they are interested in data, but they're interested in data to help them accomplish their siloed goals too often. As I've hopefully made clear, getting fundamental things right, like ICP, often require a data and analytical perspective that spans the entire customer journey, as evidenced by the LTV to CAC analysis. And this is where boards, CEOs, CFOs naturally focus, because this is the stuff that moves the needle on efficient growth and subsequently company valuation. So CFOs need to own this because they are fluent in data analysis, but also because they have the required cross-functional value-driving perspective. So that's all for today. I know I've gone through it very quickly. DM me or email me at Scott@Scale Matters, and we will share this template to you. The important part of all of this is you've got to prioritize nailing ICP and using very good data to do that, because that will be step number one in achieving the efficient growth you guys probably badly desire. Do we have time for any questions, Dan? Or
yeah, why don't we cover the one of the questions that came in. Somebody asked early on in the presentation when you were talking about the importance of focusing on ICP. Is that importance the same in a vertical SaaS environment as it is in a horizontal SaaS environment? I'm just curious if you had any take on that.
Well, I mean, I think it becomes more important in horizontal because you have a broader base of customers you could sell to. But even within vertical, let's say, healthcare, you still have attributes like size or organizational makeup. I'm not sure what the particular attribute is, but there will definitely be. Let me put it this way. If you look at all of your customers in a vertical and they all seem to have similar LTV to CAC, then I'd say, no, you don't need to get too sophisticated on this. But I think what you'll see is there's a wide variety, and you want to look at that against tagged attribute profiles to start to understand which ones, what are the profiles of the ones that are most profitable.
Uh-huh. Okay, and the other question was about the template, whether it's going to be shared, and I did answer that in the chat. We'll send out the template that Scott walked through on the webinar in a follow-up email. And with that, I think we will wrap up here. The last thing I'll do is just highlight our 10-question go-to-market reporting health check on our website. If you want to see how well you can answer the top critical questions about go-to-market operations and see how well your company scores on that,